Hello and welcome. I'm excited today to interview my good friend, Janice Smith. Janice, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you. Enjoying this cold weather.
It is a bit chilly outside, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm glad we can snuggle up in this nice office in here.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for our conversation today. You've been my friend since 2014 when we met, and I've first got to know you and Ken.
Yes.
And then over the years, I've seen you do something quite courageous. And that's actually what we want to talk about today, which is caring for an aging spouse.
Blessing and a curse.
Blessing and a curse, right? I've heard that phrase before.
It's nice to have them with you, but
right.
sometimes get tough.
Absolutely. So I just want to start off by asking you, tell us a little bit about you and your family, so our listeners can kind of understand where you're coming from, and absolutely your story will come out as we have our conversation today. But
okay, well, brief introduction. We're a blended family. Ken and I were married in 1985. I had 3 children with me, and he had 4 children with him. And we had been married for 4 years, and a surprise came into our lives. We had a child born who is now 29 years old and just blessed us with our most recent grandchild.
Bit of the Brady Bunch. I love it.
Yes, so that was an interesting experience. I didn't know him, obviously, when he was a young man, not until he was much older. He was 10 years older than me, which didn't seem strange at the time because he was a very young man and appeared that way and acted that way, went on scout trips and things with his sons. And I actually realized as we got older, and especially as his health was getting bad, I was glad that I was 10 years younger, because if I had been in my 80s when he was in his 80s and having bad health, it would have been much more difficult to
I'm sure, right. Okay.
So, as things turned out, it was
a good marriage.
Yeah. Yes.
Good match. So blended family, his, yours, and one.
Ours.
His, yours, and ours.
One of ours.
And your youngest is now 29 years old. Okay. Nice. So, and a wonderful family. I've met a lot of them.
They're wonderful. They're very supportive, and I love family.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll kind of start it off when I first met you back in 2014. I had met you and Ken and sat down with the both of you and kind of started doing some planning.
Yes.
And that's where I noticed Ken and saw his fun personality.
Yes.
So my first experiences of Ken were not jump out of your seat active, but really witty, really funny, really smiley, very kind.
Very kind. And patient.
And then that was in 2014, and then he passed away in 2018, right? So 4 years later. So here today, we want to talk about working with and supporting an aging spouse. So kind of walk us through that timeline and share with us a little bit about what your story is.
Okay, just to back up a little bit, he did suffer a stroke in about 2004. It was in the brainstem and caused him to have balance difficulties and difficulty swallowing, which by a miracle he was able to recover. A little bit after that, I noticed that his thinking was kind of different, in the sense that we'd be talking about something and just kind of out of left field he'd start talking about something else, just kind of disconnected. So I did some research into hyperbaric treatment, and we did some hyperbaric treatment, and it seemed to me that helped his brain function.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it was a very subtle thing, but
was that in hospital or in-visit doctor? Or?
No, it was a clinic that we visited.
Okay, just outpatient.
It was not covered by insurance, so we just paid for it out of pocket. But I felt it was worth it. So then we moved to Utah from LA, in LA area, in 2013. And I could tell that his memory was kind of slipping a little bit. And I was concerned, having gone through 15 years of Alzheimer's with my mother, which is an unusual long time, but she was very healthy physically. And she was actually in assisted living for 15 years until she died at 98.
Incredible.
And I learned a lot from that experience, as you can imagine. And so I took him up to the University of Utah neurology department to have him tested, and they did a lot of hours of testing and came back with a diagnosis of vascular dementia with an Alzheimer's component.
Interesting.
The vascular dementia being on the brain MRI, they could detect little places where there had been bleeds that had destroyed some of the cells around. Nothing, it was not anything physical, but obviously in the memory area. And so that was mild at that point, and they followed him for about a year, and I think the last time we went there, they said, he has mild dementia. Call us if you have any problems. And there's nothing they could do for it.
So just kind of put the ball in your court. Was at that point, from the doctor or the hospital's perspective, was there any training or resources, or did they send you home with a workbook and said, this is how you work with this aging spouse?
Not specifically. I believe there were resources recommended, but I kind of felt like I knew what I was doing.
Okay. You had some confidence there.
Having observed my mother for all those years, and with my sister talking about dealing with memory problems, I kind of learned some tricks of the trade and sort of knew what to expect and how to deal with it. I wasn't coming into it blind, in other words. I had been aware of that. And then within the next year, his memory just really declined rapidly until, I think I wrote down, by 2016, he basically remembered me and not much more. Sometimes he'd say, I'd mention something about children, and he'd say, I have children? Well, we don't remember that part of life.
Yeah, that's a quick decline. So basically within 2 to 3 years, he went from every once in a while in a conversation randomly change the topic awkwardly to not remembering anything but his spouse. Really
memory loss. It was very rapid. It surprised me because my mother's experience had been so different with the Alzheimer's. Her memory loss was very slow, very, very slow decline. So that was difficult to deal with.
Okay. Now, in this time period, this whole time you've been taking care of Ken at home. Oftentimes, and I believe a lot of our listeners can probably relate to this, whether it's their own parents or a current aging spouse, there comes a time where there's this awkward transition or this hard decision that needs to be made from transitioning from home care to facility care.
Right.
How did you cope with that? How did you go through that? How did you make that decision, and when did that happen?
That is a big challenge. And one of the concerns was because of his physical health, we had a home health nurse coming in. She said, you don't want to, if you're going to do some kind of care, you don't want to put it off too long, because if he gets to the point where he needs like 2 people to lift him, he won't qualify to be in assisted living. He'll need to be in a more expensive kind of facility.
Oh, interesting.
So I kind of had to plan ahead. And
I've actually never heard that before, but that absolutely makes sense. Because in most qualifications, there's these things called activities of daily living. And to qualify for most long-term care insurances or long-term plans, you need to just not be able to perform 2 of those.
Right. Like if you need help bathing, if you need help managing your money, if you need help being fed, if you need assistance. Transportation.
Cleaning,
things like that.
But delaying to the extreme.
If it's physical, where they just need to have more people to assist, if he's already in the facility, like assisted living, they won't kick him out. But if you try to get in, this is what she told me anyway, that I need to be aware of. So actually, my mother assisted me with this decision as it happened, because in 2017, so that was the year before Ken passed away, she was in Southern California, and I got a call from my sister saying, Mom isn't swallowing and she probably won't live for another week. So I needed to be in California, and I'd been thinking, what will I do with my husband? I'd been wanting to go down anyway to visit my kids, and I couldn't travel with him anymore. So do I have someone come in the house? Do I try to get him in respite care? You can, for a few weeks, you can get into an assisted living place without a full-time commitment. And I needed someone like yesterday.
Yeah.
Someplace.
Urgent.
And this home health care nurse had suggested a place here in Lehigh within 5 minutes drive of my house. And I went over and checked, and they happened to have one bed available. And he could move in the next day so that I could be on my flight to California. So that was the thing that eased the immediate decision of getting into assisted living.
The circumstance of I need to do it. So it might have been a decision that you've delayed to that point for many months, possibly. I'm sure you thought about it for a long time,
well,
but just didn't know.
Because for one thing, it was he was tall. He was almost 6 feet tall, and I'm 5'2". So he was a big man. And there were a couple of times when I was trying to assist him in and out of the shower. His physical health was getting bad, and his balance was not good. His legs were not strong. A couple of times we almost tipped together out of the shower into the basin area.
Oh, no.
It was becoming
a little bit of a hazard for you.
A physical concern.
Right.
Yeah. And to balance that, you think, well, I should be taking care of him at home. He's my husband. Should I have someone come in the house? You have all those concerns.
I can absolutely see the emotional decision that went into that. A bit about my experience with taking care of an aging spouse. It wasn't my spouse. It was actually my grandfather that lived in our home in Highland for the last 8 or so years of his life. And I saw firsthand my parents take care of my grandfather.
Yes.
And it did go through that same type of digression of health, physical health, right? They went from Grandpa Ray being very able to take care of himself, his hygiene, his bathing, to a point where, my parents were having to really help him with that, which made it difficult for my mom and for my dad, which ultimately led to their decision to put him into a beehive home.
Now, I was thinking, too, one thing that I didn't have a concern about, oftentimes people with dementia will wander, and you have to put extra locks on the door and be worried about them at night because they tend to be up at night. Because of his physical health, oops, how do I do that? Oh, dear. Let's turn this.
No, that's okay. Technology interruption.
Technology. Can't turn it off.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. So because
I didn't worry about him wandering, and he hadn't been driving for quite a long time, so I didn't worry about him, getting in the car and taking off. That was a
bonus.
Something that people sometimes have to worry about.
So kind of coming back to the transition between home care and facility care. Before I ask a few questions about facility care, I'd love to know a little bit more about how you really helped Ken at home. What did that look like? Did you feel like because he was at home, you were doing all the meal preparation, all the cleaning?
Oh, everything.
Did you feel like you could get out and do what you needed to do, shopping, social events, or did you feel like you were at home a lot more than you wanted to?
I'm smiling because one thing I remember is that he developed some, at one point, schizophrenia. Paranoia. Okay. Like, I would go out to shop for 10 minutes and he'd come back and he'd say, "Where have you been? You've been gone for 4 hours. You have a boyfriend, blah, blah, blah."
Interesting.
Interesting. These long decisions about fidelity and no, I've never, one guy woman, and I've never have a boyfriend, and I've only been gone but because of the memory loss, he had no sense of time. And so he had no way of telling how long I'd been gone. So that was kind of a problem. For social things, we'd often go to church and to family activities and things together, so we were able to do that. That's so long ago, so years ago. I kind of put it out of my mind, I guess. He was physically able to get around the house and such, so that I was able to, I think, go out and go shopping or things like that. I don't remember feeling really confined to the house. I know people frequently do.
So you didn't have any of those feelings of missing out?
I don't really recall that, because, as I say, I could still take him with me places. He just would kind of be a little vacant.
Okay. So as you made that transition from home care, it sounds like you did it like a champ. I feel like you need to flex your muscle right here and say, good job.
Well,
good job,
as
Janice.
I say, the move was kind of forced upon me. That was blessedly. When I came back, I was actually gone a total of 4 weeks. But because my mom rallied, and then she passed away, and then I helped my sister with all the arrangements. So I was actually gone for weeks, and so coming back, I thought, okay, do I bring him back into the home now? Do I keep him in assisted living? Because I had been thinking about the need for it. And it seemed a good situation for him, and I just thought, it's really time to have him with having that care, just for both of us.
So let's kind of shift to having the conversation about now that he's in a facility. What was his initial experience? I hear a lot of times from spouses that take their spouse to the facility, there's a lot of pushback, there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of resentment or anger or frustration or confusion. Was there any of that you or your family experienced? Or did he just step in? He's like, oh, this is my new home. This is great.
Kind of some of both. I'm just, pulling up some memories. Like he'd say to me, aren't married people supposed to be living in the same place? Why am I here and you're someplace else? But then I would take him home to the house for meals or for family get-togethers, or just bring him home on Sunday afternoon for meals. And he'd walk in and say, oh, this is a nice place. He didn't even recognize our home that we'd lived in for, at that time, a number of years. So his memory was far enough gone that he recognized that it was, something was wrong, like it, shouldn't.
It was like a subconscious thought of spouses should live together, right, and you're not here.
And yet he wasn't really fighting it, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
That's good.
That's good. Yeah. I've heard some other stories.
Yes. Yeah.
So in the facility now that he's there, how, as a spouse, how do you show up and support a spouse? What did that look like with your experience? Were you there just a few times a week? Were you there every day, all day?
I wouldn't say that I got there every day, but several times a week. And sometimes I'd have meals with him. Sometimes I'd pick him up and take him shopping with me, or we'd go to Ashton Gardens and walk through the gardens. Me sometimes pushing him in a wheelchair when he got to that point. But I tried to interact with him as much as I could, and he was always mostly glad to see me.
Yeah. You say that with a smile. Do you have a story that goes behind that?
Yes. Well, I would say maybe 98% of the time he recognized me. And I recall one time I went to pick him up. We were going to go to Ashton Gardens to meet my daughter-in-law and children there. And I walked in and he looked at me and he said, I'm not going with you. I only go with my wife.
Oh, okay.
I said, oh, okay. Well, he and one of the caregivers tried to, for me in a few minutes, convince him that I was that wife, and he wasn't having any of it. I realized I didn't have my phone with me, so I drove back to my house, which is just 5 minutes away, and the facility was on my way to Ashton Gardens, so I thought, well, I'll just stop in and see what the memory is to now. I walked in and he said to me, there have been 3 women here trying to get me to go with them, and I won't go with anybody but you.
Okay. So in that short amount of time, he went from not recognizing you, only want to leave with his wife, to then
seeing that I was that wife. These other women had been here, but I'm not going.
But interesting that he actually remembered, though, that other women had been there.
Yes, isn't that interesting? So it's. I would say that one of the things you have to have is a sense of humor.
Absolutely.
And just. I would say make new memories, like these funny little things that I remember. You have to kind of forget. You have to have a memory loss yourself when you're dealing with someone who has a memory loss, in the sense that your loved one is in a new place. Oftentimes they don't remember any more than 2 minutes ago, and you just have to go with that. Just live in the moment with them, and enjoy the moment. With my mother, I remember my sister kept a little diary of funny things my mom would say in relation to her memory loss, and she shared them with us at my mom's memorial. They were so fun, and I wish I had done more of that with Ken, just like this little one about not recognizing me and then recognizing me again, because they can be bits of humor that you share, that you remember.
Janice, I think that is a great point of wisdom that you just shared, where you almost need to have a little bit of memory loss yourself because your life is different. Your relationship is different. And I think that the quicker that we can come to that realization, we can kind of let go of expectations of what has been and move into a space of what might be and the adventure of that. So having a memory loss yourself, that's really insightful.
I especially learned that with my mom because her memory loss went over such a long time. And we kind of lost Mom a long time ago. And then we had this new relationship with this new mother that she still had her funny sense of humor and her sweet personality. She just didn't remember most things. I'd say to her, I'm your daughter. And she was remembering when she was a child, and she'd think, I'm a kid. How can I have a daughter? I mean, I realized that's where her thought patterns were. And so that explained our relationship. And so I learned to deal with that with Ken.
Yeah. As we're having this conversation, a story that you shared with me several years ago came to mind. And I would love for you to kind of retell that, if you would. I remember you telling me that you went to go visit Ken, and he did not remember you as his wife, where you came back and just to a point where you were just introducing you as his friend, and you could sit down and have a conversation that way instead of the awkward confrontation of trying to convince them that you're married.
You can't convince them, so you just take them from where you are and enjoy the conversation. That's why I say just enjoy the minute. And sometimes he would come back to it and remember, and another time it was just that was as much as we got that day.
Okay, nice. So you just introducing yourself as his friend was a way for you kind of forgetting your past together, putting a smile on, of course, but creating a space where this is your new experience.
This is our new relationship. Unfortunately, the next time he did remember me, but it comes to a point where it doesn't come back. But yes, that's the forgetting that you have.
But I love how you approach that. You just saw this potential conflict where I know me as a married person, if I went home and my wife was like, I'm not married to you, that would be a point of contention. Yes. But I love the way that you approach this experience by just putting on a smile, realizing where you're at in that moment, and stepping into a new experience.
And not making a confrontation about it.
And being okay with that. Right, I love that. So now we've been talking about transition from home care into facility care. As Ken digressed there at the facility care, was there any other experiences that he had? You had talked about in the home, he would never leave. Did he ever leave while he was at the facility?
Leave the facility?
Leave the facility?
No, he talked about it. He talked about it. He'd say, well, I'm getting out of here. I'm just leaving. I'm not staying here. I'm going.
So he was big on talk, but not do.
Yeah. The people the caregivers there would sometimes say that he was just going to walk home. And I thought, oh, good. He doesn't even know where it is. But
So we've talked a little bit about that transition. However, I would love to kind of back up and ask you a little bit more personally, how are you feeling? Because I know a lot of our listeners that are choosing to listen to this episode, obviously they saw the title, Caring for an Aging Spouse, and something triggered within them. Like either they're experiencing that with their spouse or they're experiencing that with a parent, and they're really just trying to wrap their head around emotionally, spiritually, how do I approach this challenge in life? So I would love if you would share with our listeners, where were you at?
Well, the first thing that pops in my mind is that I tried to keep active. For example, independently active, sort of. At the time, I was doing a lot of research, family history research, so I had names that needed to go to the temple, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint Temple. And I found that I could go early in the morning, like 7 o'clock, and be back at 9 o'clock, and he'd still be asleep and he wouldn't even notice that I was gone. So this was one way that I could sneak in an activity that without any problem. I think that family is really important. We have 3 of our children, of our large family, who live here in the Utah Valley, and so we would have family activities together, and always had their support.
Mm-hmm. So the family was around a lot,
which is helpful. Yeah, and the kids grandchildren were really good with him, and understood where he was and where he was not. And
So for you, as you were now becoming more and more the spouse that was the dependable one that was doing all the housework and the cleaning and the cooking, you did have some help then. If you needed some big piece of furniture moved, you would have some of your children close by.
Yes.
Or if you needed a deep clean, hopefully one of your daughters would come help out. And kind of, so you weren't completely on an island.
Right. And I can see that would be a real challenge with some people where they don't have that backup system, like if we were living across the country and the children weren't close by or something like that.
Okay. So emotionally, losing a spouse to an unexpected accident and passing, that is very difficult.
Yes.
However, very sudden. However, what you went through was this gradual loss of the man that you love. First mentally and then physically. Emotionally, at what point did you start feeling the grief of your loss? Was it so gradual that it really wasn't until after his passing, and then it wasn't as big because you'd already kind of grieved along the way? Or what did that look like?
I would say after he passed away, a couple of weeks after he had passed away, I realized that having him in assisted living was, in a sense, a blessing, because we had a year from the time my mother passed away until he passed away that he was in the assisted living, where he was not at home all the time. So it wasn't like one day I woke up and my husband was no longer beside me in bed. It was this kind of gradual, in addition to the memory loss, that we were physically separated for a time, so that I found that it made the grieving easier. It was not an abrupt change, like, as you say, if you have loss of accident or sudden heart attack or some other cause of death that comes very abruptly. That's a real wrenching thing, I think, to grieve and to experience.
With your children, did you see them grieve any differently, or do you have any memory of how they went through that grieving process? Did they feel the loss of their father gradually as well?
I believe they did, because they could see, his memory decline, and then his physical health failed very rapidly at the very last, like within a week. I could tell he was not going to last very long, and so we actually had a really nice experience at the end, because I was able to let children who were out of town know that I don't think he's going to last till the end of the week. And we had his room full of children and grandchildren for the last 2 days, and we were just sharing memories and singing karaoke songs. And
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And I think it was especially good for the grandchildren, because they could see that death is not anything to be feared. We were there, Grandpa was there, and then he was gone, and we are sorry that he's gone, and we miss him, but it wasn't a mysterious, fearful kind of experience.
Sudden, dark, always sad, tearful thing. There can be joy in that.
And we have happy memories about that time that we spent with him right at the last, with cousins together and aunts and uncles, and that was beautiful. It was a special experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I know I had the sacred privilege of attending his funeral, part of that memorial, and I loved. You do have a big family, so it was fun to see a lot of people, but I loved the spirit there and the experience that all of you were having. There wasn't this heavy feeling of sadness. It was almost a feeling of appreciation for the life that was given, and the great stories and smiles that were shared. Now, of course, there were tears, because being more permanently separated from those that we love is difficult. but I feel like your family has gone through this experience with a bit of joy in your hearts. Yeah. I believe partly based off what you just shared, because you gradually went through this loss and you were able to experience some loss, but then still give him a hug, and then experience some loss and then physically still have him there. Yeah. But I also felt like a big part of that is your family's more eternal perspective of the soul and of our experience with our relationship. So I love that. Thank you for letting me experience that.
I don't know if I should share this. I sometimes get odd thoughts in my head.
Absolutely, share it.
So I told you that Ken was very patient, very loving, very kind, and thoughtful, always. And a couple of days after he passed away, I was just kind of driving mindlessly along the freeway, you know how you do, and this thought just popped into my head. Because at the point that he passed away, he'd had a lot of arthritis in his knees, so it hurt him to walk. And so the last month or so, he ended up in a wheelchair, and he did not like that. But it hurt him to walk. So because he was in the wheelchair, it required people to lift him and, you know, give him all the personal care that he did not like. So this thought came to me. I could just kind of see him saying, Heavenly Father, I'm not good to anyone down here. I'm a burden to Janice. I'm a burden to my children. I think it's time for me to go back to heaven, and I can kind of watch over them from there. It'll be a much better situation. You know, I don't know if that was my mind, you know, sort of helping me to get over the grief of him being gone, but sure. But it would be in character for him to do that because of his such rapid decline. Mm-hmm. And in fact, at the very last, he was kind of hanging on. I thought, just let go. And one of my sons said, I think he's waiting for someone. I said, everybody's here who can be here. Well, one son was at the house. He said, I don't need to be there when he dies. He finally came up, sat down by his dad, took his hand, and in 10 minutes he was just gone.
So Dad was waiting. He was waiting for that last son to be there.
So wow. it was a good family experience, and I think all of that helped to make the grieving period easier. And then just keeping busy.
Right. Do you mind if we kind of take a little bit of a shift in our conversation? Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of our listeners out there are also concerned with, how do I take care of my spouse financially? What does that look like? We have all these fears of what long-term care costs between adult daycare and a full-time assisted living facility to nursing home facility, and the burden financially that can be on the family. Do you want to kind of share with us what were some of your fears maybe moving into that, or what was your approach, and how did you go through that experience?
I obviously was concerned about it, and I thank Devin Peterson for helping me set up.
Well, you're welcome.
A little ad here. Testimonial.
Shameless. It's okay.
Yes. Because that obviously is a concern, and long-term care or care in a facility can be very expensive. And you helped us to manage our retirement money in such a way that there was a little pot set aside to pay for that care, because we did not have any long-term care insurance. Right. Hadn't been smart enough to get that.
Right. At this point, Ken was in his 70s, late 70s?
He was 86 when he passed away. Okay. So he was in his early 80s when we first met you.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, naturally, that was about the time that you started to see his memory slip. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, in your early 80s is not a time to go and buy long-term care insurance, right? Not only would it be extremely expensive, you probably wouldn't even qualify for it, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and I point that out because buying expensive long-term care insurance is not always an option, mm-hmm. right? Not always, even if it's not as expensive, it's not always the best solution either. Right. But you need to be able to kind of roll with what you have, mm-hmm. see your resources in front of you, and then make some best decisions on how you're going to approach some of those long-term mm-hmm. care costs, right? Mm-hmm. So in your scenario, it was more of kind of consulting with an advisor, to sitting down and saying, okay, here's what our expenses are, here are some of our savings resources, mm-hmm. which one should we set aside and kind of have mm-hmm. intentionally be there for taking care of Ken's care.
Right. And that was a big sense of peace and relief for me, knowing that if we needed it, there was money there that would help to pay for it, because that can be really hard for people who don't have the resources to be able to get that care.
Right. If you don't mind me asking, how much was per month? How much was his care? Do you recall?
It was $3,500 a month.
So $3,500 a month.
And it was a well cared for place. It was not fancy at all, but it was well recommended to me by this nurse that I respected, and she worked there, and she said, I won't work in any place that they don't take care of. It was a small one. It was 16 beds. So they had good attention.
A quick side note on that, as we're talking about facilities and expenses and stuff, did it make a big difference for you having it so close to your home? You mentioned it was 5 minutes away.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So that's something that you would recommend, that people
Very
find
much.
Somewhere close that you can visit often.
Yeah, it was much easier. The other place that was recommended was over in probably 20 minutes away, just not
That's
as
a bit more of a drive. Yeah.
I mean, it's not that far. I come from LA, and my sister used to drive an hour and 15 minutes to get to visit our mom.
Oh, wow.
And she sometimes regretted that it was so far away.
But I feel like a 5-minute drive makes it easy to stop in, say hi, not a burden.
Right.
It's just really natural part of. Right.
You don't have to plan your day around making a visit. You can just stop in and bring them an ice cream cone or something.
One more financial aspect that I did want to ask about. When we first got together, we had actually had a conversation, because Ken was a veteran. We'd had a conversation about taking care of his final expenses and using and leveraging some of the VA benefits and taking the time beforehand to fill out a final wishes organizer, which is at your passing, this is the type of services that I want, this is the kind of funeral that I want, and having that all written down and actually funded in your case. Putting together that prepaid funeral plan, how did that help? Was it just an emotional thing? Was it a financial benefit? What do you remember?
I'd say all of the above. I knew that he was going to be buried in the Veterans Cemetery, so I didn't have to screw around and find that. I just had to make a call. We had the mortuary all set up. Everything was planned. We'd picked out the casket, and all the arrangements were made ahead of time. So that didn't need to be done in the midst of
the emotional loss. Right. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe when you initially set up your funeral plan, you'd put a payment plan on that.
It was like an insurance policy.
And so by the time he passed away, I think you ended up paying a little bit less than half of what you would have had to pay.
I think we'd only paid on it for 2 years, and it was scheduled out over 10 years. So that was one time that insurance really helped.
It doesn't always happen that way, but I think you came out ahead.
I'm still paying on mine.
Okay, that's right. But emotionally, that always helps when you can understand whether your financial resources for the facility is taken care of, or the final expenses are taken care of. As you can tell from our conversation today, that taking care of an aging spouse is not a easy, emotional, natural ability that we all have. It's a very new experience. And so as much of that additional financial burden that you can take off of your shoulders, I encourage you absolutely to do, right? Plan ahead. If you're in your 60s, great. Look at some sort of long-term care insurance or life insurance or annuity that has a long-term care component in there. But plan ahead. Most folks will experience some way, shape, or form.
We are living longer these days.
Because we're living longer these days, right? And so I believe the statistic is for a couple that lives to the age of 65, you have a 75% chance of at least one of those spouses going into a long-term care facility. So those are pretty high percentages. And it doesn't always have to be a fancy plan that's really expensive, as long as you kind of purposely take that into consideration. Once you're to a point of taking care of an aging spouse, just as you had mentioned, that goes a long way to bring some comfort and peace of mind. Wonderful.
Definitely.
As we start to kind of wrap up this conversation, Janice, is there, in your mind's eye, I want you to kind of see some of our listeners, someone that was in your shoes, 6, 7, 8 years ago, dealing with or anticipating this experience coming into their short-term future, is there any additional insight, comfort, direction, perspective that you would like to share with them? You've shared a lot of great insight and wisdom so far.
Well, what I wrote down, that you have confidence in planning, which we just talked about, treasuring new memories, being able to look beyond. Oh, one thing about that, in our family with my siblings, we have this line that we remember. My parents lived into their 90s. My dad was 96 when he passed away, and he was 6 years older than my mom. And then she lived beyond him another 10 years or something. It was just astonishing. But he used to say to her, he'd get so, he had difficulty dealing with the memory loss, and he'd say, "Lorene, don't you remember?" And we'd say, "No, Dad, she doesn't remember."
Actually,
that's our line. "No, Dad, she doesn't remember." And so that's been one of the things that helps get through. He doesn't remember, so don't sweat it.
Don't be frustrated.
Don't be frustrated.
Yeah,
it's just a change. It's different.
So just being able to step back and see your experience for what it is. Yeah, that's wise.
And just having patience. And here's a little trick that I learned. I mentioned that he had this paranoia about my boyfriends that I was. Okay,
all of your many boyfriends.
And sometimes this would come up late at night.
I wonder if your boyfriends are listening to this.
And so I might spend 2 hours talking with him and trying to reassure him. I finally got really smart, and I'd say something like, it's really late and I'm kind of tired. Why don't we talk about it tomorrow? Smartest thing I ever did, because by tomorrow, of course, he wouldn't remember. Right. And so sometimes you can help have the memory loss work in your favor. If you get into a difficult situation, say, well, let's talk about it in an hour. Or phone's ringing. Got to take the dog for a while. Whatever it is, just break the conversation and come back in whatever time it is. And probably the situation will help resolve itself, because they don't remember that.
I love that. Take advantage of the memory loss, turn it on its head and turn it into your favor.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
That helps a lot.
So in conclusion, I want to ask a question just about you personally. And this is a question that I ask all of my listeners, because I feel like it's so important for us to realize what we can do to stay alive and be relevant. So I'm going to ask you, Janice, what in your life right now, what makes you feel absolutely alive and keeps you very relevant in your community and world around you?
Well, things like tomorrow night I have a play date with my new granddaughter.
Oh, that's a great one.
It's fun to have a new baby in the family. I actually have a missionary calling now in my church.
Oh, tell me about it.
But it's not traditional missionary. I'm working in the family history library up in Salt Lake and learning so many new things, cramming my old brain with lots of new things, so that when people come into the library looking for help with finding their ancestors, hopefully I can be some help.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a teaching, encouraging kind of an opportunity for me, and I'm just thrilled to be doing that. It came at a good time, because I realized the past year I've become a little bit of a hermit, just staying in my home, working with my computer, doing this stuff that keeps me actively engaged mentally, but not a lot with people. So this is an opportunity to do the same kind of thing, but being out with people.
So being with people, serving. I love that you're learning and growing.
I'm trying.
Right? Not slowing down, but learning and growing and moving forward. I love that.
Yeah.
It's a great way to stay alive and stay absolutely relevant. Right?
Well, when I turned 75, I heard the statistic that if you're 75, you have a very good chance of living to be 95. So I'm planning on it. So I figure I have a lot to do in the next, it's a little less than 20 years now.
All right, let's keep up that pace. I love it. I love it. Well, Janice, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. It's been a great pleasure for me to interact with you again. I know over the last several years, we've actually had lots of small conversations about your experience. And I was just so excited to get you in my office and sit down and have a little bit more of a direct, longer conversation here. So thank you so much for your contribution to our podcast and to those that are listening.
Thank you, Devin.
All right.
You're a good friend.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we will see you on the next episode.